Biden greets the president of Kenya as the US faces pressure in Africa. William Ruto, the president of Kenya, is the first African leader to visit the US on an official state visit in almost 15 years. President Joe Biden has the chance to show his dedication to Africa during this window of time when Washington seems to be lagging behind in its engagement with the region. However, as traditional spheres of Western influence are challenged by strategic adversaries like China and Russia, relations with other African allies are under jeopardy. Once upon a time, Mr. Ruto would have seemed an improbable recipient of the pomp and circumstance bestowed annually upon a select group of close allies at the White House. He was accused with crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court in connection with the unrest that followed Kenya's 2007 election. However, the matter was dropped, and Mr. Ruto went on to remake himself as the US's valued partner. According to US Ambassador to Kenya Meg Whitman, Congress did not choose not to invite him to speak in a joint session because of lingering doubts about his democratic credentials. She believes it to be a scheduling conflict. A former CEO of eBay and Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, Ms. Whitman is an advocate for Kenya and its investment potential as a digital hub, or the Silicon Savannah. Who would be the best person to attend a state dinner if you truly want to lean into Africa? She queries. For the past 60 years, Kenya has been an ally of the United States. Without a doubt, it is East Africa's most stable democracy. President Ruto is a true leader who has stepped forward. Under Mr. Ruto, Kenya has grown into the diplomatic and commercial hub of the area, serving as the US's anchor state in a dangerous neighborhood. Despite criticism at home for how he has managed the faltering economy, he has emerged as a worldwide voice for Africa on debt relief and climate change issues. Kenya has expressed satisfaction to Washington by promising to send Kenyan police to Haiti, making it another major security ally in East Africa. President Biden spoke with Mr. Ruto over the phone last year, the only other leader in sub-Saharan Africa, on Nairobi's pledge to command an international force into the nation in crisis. Analysts speculate that the state visit is partially intended as payback for Mr. Biden's broken pledge to travel to Africa. He promised his guests he was all in for the continent when he made the pledge 2 years ago during a major summit of African leaders in Washington. However, since then, he has been preoccupied with other crises, such as the wars in Gaza and Ukraine. The administration's announcement of a new plan to transform its ties with African nations into more equal partnerships that further each nation's strategic interests before the summit. While Mr. Ruto is in some respects the embodiment of that strategy, the attention in Washington has been drawn to US defeats in West Africa since his arrival. Niger might be the nation that most aptly illustrates the difficulties the US has in Africa. About a period of time, about 1,000 US soldiers were based there, operating from 2 bases to conduct security operations against Islamist insurgents in the area. However, following a coup in 2017, the nature of the alliance shifted, with the military rulers of Niger becoming more allied with Iran and Russia. In March, US attempts to establish a means to maintain security cooperation broke down. The Prime Minister of the junta accused a senior US delegation of acting in a condescending tone and with a lack of respect, as reported by the Washington Post. It was attempting, he said, to control Niamey's international relations. The Pentagon announced this week that it will withdraw all of its troops by September, which means that Niger and Moscow can now have even tighter connections. The top State Department official for African Affairs, Molly Fee, claims that it was impossible to reconcile American interests and values with those of the junta, including a deadline for the return to civilian administration. She told the BBC that we shared legitimate concerns about the trajectory of Niger's discussions with Russia and Iran. She stated that the relationship should be reciprocal and that, in the end, we were not able to reach an understanding that addressed our top priorities. We plan to uphold our other ties in addition to our diplomatic partnership. The collapse occurs after the former colonial power, the French, is driven out of Niger. It emphasizes the conflicts that arise when the US seeks to strike a balance between democratic norms and security alliances, limitations that the Russians do not share. Other Sahel nations have seen similar events to those that occurred in Niger, with Moscow willing to provide support to those who have taken control in a series of coups, frequently in return for access to natural resources. A small group of US soldiers were recently compelled to withdraw from neighboring Chad after local authorities there expressed doubts about the US military's long-term viability. Other countries on the continent are posing a greater threat to America. For the past 20 years, China has been investing in Africa, but there are many new middle power competitors. According to a Gallup poll conducted last year, China had gained support, while the US had lost its advantage in soft power. The most significant shift, though, was Russia's growing appeal. Africa has always been viewed by the West as a problem that has to be fixed. Actors like as China, Turkey and other Arab Gulf players perceive it as a chance to take, according to Maritha Mutiga, the International Crisis Group's director of its Africa program. Therefore, it has been praised that China, Turkey and the Gulf have taken an active interest in the continent, as it is perceived as a long-term wager. The Biden administration claims that its attempts to view Africa as a strategic ally have shown some progress. Africa has been presented as the continent of the future due to a wave of high-level visits, its youthful, rapidly expanding population, its wealth of natural resources, and its growing impact on the global scene. Although the US has found it difficult to win over Africans to its perspectives on Russia's conflict with Ukraine and Israel's war in Gaza, American support has helped African countries gain greater representation at international fora, including the World Bank, IMF, and G20. Praise has also been bestowed upon the administration for its investments in the Lobito Corridor, a rail route that winds through Zambia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Angola, and is intended to be utilized for the transportation of vital raw materials. According to Kingsley Moghalu, a political economist from Nigeria and former governor of the central bank, with that Lobito corridor, the Americans decided to speak in the language that Africans understand. You have the power to discuss democracy and other related topics if you are perceived as carrying out significant projects that benefit African economies and people. The head of Chatham House's Africa programme in London, Alex Vines, refutes the idea that Western influence is waning in Africa. We'd rather go à la carte. We want options. We get tired of Chinese buffets, an African leader told me, the speaker continues. Therefore, I believe that a growing number of African nations desire a small amount of the United States, but they also want a small amount of Russia, the United Arab Emirates, or Turkey. The difficulty lies in patchy African leadership that can capitalize on the competition and has an aspirational long-term vision. While Niger is one of the countries with alternatives, President Ruto is considered as one of the ones who can. Dr. Vine states, "A game of chess is underway. A fresh race is underway for Africa. The African continent is dynamic and not passive, unlike the chessboard. It has the power to truly astonish and ensnare people.